In the autumn of 1947, Frank Sinatra was in New York, and Edith Piaf was in New York, and someone arranged for the one to see the other perform. What happened after the performance is the part that has not been told clearly. What Sinatra said, or did not say, in the minutes after Piaf walked off stage has been reported in fragments, in different versions, in the scattered memoirs of people who were in the room or claimed to have been. The consistent element across all versions is the silence. He did not say a word immediately after she finished. Frank Sinatra, in 1947, was already a phenomenon. He had broken out of the big band world earlier in the decade, had caused a sensation at the Paramount Theater in 1942 that the music press did not know how to describe, had built a following that responded to something in his voice that the popular music of the period had not previously produced in that form. He was 29 years old in the autumn of 1947. He had been performing professionally for almost a decade. He knew exactly what a voice could do and exactly what most voices could not. He had not heard Piaf in a room before. And this is the distinction that matters for everything that follows. A recording is not the voice. A recording is what the voice left behind in the machines. The voice itself in a room is a different thing. It occupies space. It moves air. It arrives at the listener through the physics of sound shaped by the room's dimensions and the listener's position within it. Sinatra understood this distinction precisely because he had spent his career exploiting it. He walked into this room to see what a French woman, considered the equivalent of his best, could do with a room when she was actually in it. The performance ended. The room applauded. The applause in that kind of room, small, close, intimate, is a different sound from the applause in a theater. It is louder in proportion to the number of people, more present, less mediated by distance. Piaf took her bow, and in the accounts that exist of the next few minutes, Sinatra is consistently described as doing something that the people who knew him well found unusual. He was quiet. Not the quiet of someone who had nothing to say, the quiet of someone who had too much to say and was choosing not to say any of it immediately. The people around him were ready with their responses, the compliments, the superlatives, the specific language that the New York entertainment world had developed for exactly this kind of evening. Sinatra did not reach for any of it. He spoke eventually. What he said varies across the accounts, but the consistent element is this. He acknowledged that she was doing something he had been trying to describe to people for years and had not been able to describe. She had given him the description in the duration of a performance. The thing he had been doing without being able to name it, she had named it by doing it in front of him. And here is the re-hook, the question this raises. What was that unnamed thing? The answer, reconstructed from what Sinatra said about his own approach to a song across dozens of interviews over the decades, is specific. He called it living inside the lyric. Not performing the words, but inhabiting them. Not singing about loss or love or longing, but being, for the duration of the song, the person to whom the loss or love or longing was actually happening. He had arrived at this understanding through years of work on the American popular song. He walked into a New York nightclub and watched a French woman who did not share a word of his language or a note of his repertoire doing exactly this. Doing it so completely that a room full of people who could not understand a single word she sang understood everything she was saying. This is the second payoff. The living inside the lyric was not an American invention. It was not a French invention. It was simply the truth about what a voice does when it stops performing and starts being. She sang in French. This is the first thing that registered. The audience in that New York room understood little or nothing of the words. The language was not available to them. What was available was the voice. The voice without the text. The voice as pure instrument. The thing the voice was doing independent of whatever the words were saying. This is a specific condition for listening. When you cannot understand the language, you hear differently. The voice does not carry meaning through the words. It carries it through everything else, the pitch, the timing, the specific quality of the attack on a note, the space between the notes, the particular way this voice inhabits a phrase. Sinatra heard Piaf under those conditions. He heard the voice without the text as a shield. What he heard was something he recognized. Not the style. Piaf's Chanson tradition was nothing like the American popular song tradition he had been raised inside. Not the material. What he recognized was the relationship between the voice and the room. The specific transaction that makes a performance not an entertainment, but a transmission. He had been doing this transaction for 10 years. He understood it from the inside. What Piaf was doing was the same transaction in a completely different language, a completely different repertoire, but the same transaction. She was giving the room something real, and the room was receiving it. This is the first payoff, and it reframes how you understand Sinatra as well as Piaf. Sinatra was not simply moved by a beautiful voice. He was moved by recognizing something he knew about from the inside. The recognition was professional before it was emotional. And then it became both. The venue was small. Piaf was near enough that the audience could see the hands, the expression, the specific quality of concentration that a performer carries when they are inside the work. Sinatra sat close. He was there as a professional, someone who had come because the word was that this woman was doing something worth seeing. Professional curiosity, in a room small enough that professional curiosity could be satisfied in a single evening. Piaf did not know Sinatra well. They did not have the sustained relationship she had with some other figures of international entertainment who came into her orbit. They were aware of each other, as people at the top of the same profession in the same era are aware of each other, with the specific combination of professional respect and personal distance that awareness often produces. Piaf's American career in 1947 was still establishing itself. She had performed in New York to mixed responses, audiences who were curious and critics who were respectful but uncertain how to receive a French performer whose style had no obvious American equivalent. She was not yet the Piaf of the Waldorf Astoria engagements of the early 1950s, the Carnegie Hall appearances that made her American reputation permanent. She was a woman from Paris working to make New York understand something it had not yet fully understood. Sinatra's presence in that room was not inconsequential for that process. Not because of any practical intervention, he did not become her advocate or her promoter. But the silence that followed the performance was, in its way, a form of recognition that the applause alone could not have provided. He was the standard by which American singers were measured in 1947, and he had nothing to say. The silence was the highest compliment the room had available. There was no press announcement, no formal statement, no photograph taken of the two of them together in the green room afterward. The recognition happened in the dark, in the duration of a performance, between a woman singing in French and a man who could not understand the words, and understood everything they meant. The recordings that Sinatra made in the years following that night are still heard. The recordings that Piaf made are still heard. They do not sound like each other. They were never meant to. But inside the very different surfaces of those recordings, the American swagger of one, the Parisian rawness of the other, the same transaction is occurring. The living inside the lyric. The same living in both of them, in every language. She sang, he listened. He was quiet. And the silence said what the words, in either language, could not have said as precisely.